For more on this story, let's speak now to Business Unity South Africa's CEO, Khulegane Mathe. We're also joined by BRICS Business Council CEO, Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, as well as Deputy Director for African Diplomacy at the South African Research Chairs Initiative, Professor Lisa Otto. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Such an important discussion and so much happening just this week where our international relations and certainly even how we trade with other nations are taking place all at the same time. But I know that two of you here on our panel have already started some of your engagements this week. Mr. Mathe, perhaps we start with you. As we watch on our finance minister as well as the Reserve Bank governor all the way in Washington, getting ready to meet with G20 finance ministers and their counterparts to talk about so much, of course, tariff hikes going to be coming up. What is it that has been discussed here at home? We know that business leaders already here, having met with the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine. Perhaps, Mathe, let us in on what came out of those discussions.
Good evening, Naledi, and good evening to the fellow panelists, and thank you for inviting us. You're right, Naledi, that a lot is going on this week. Well, in fact, a lot has been going on since the start of this year. So each week has something new that is happening. The visit by the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy this week is an important visit for South Africa, given what is happening in that part of the world, the tensions that are going on in that part of the world, and the role that South Africa should play in trying to resolve those tensions. From our point of view as business, obviously, in a world in which there are tensions and in a world in which the trade environment is changing and being so rapidly, being able to normalize relations in that region and certainly agreeing on a cooperation with Ukraine is absolutely important because it opens another market for South Africa. But of course, the most important thing, I think, in every peace-loving person's mind at the moment is really to find a way of bringing conflict in that country and in that part of the world here in South
Africa. It opens another market for South Africa, Dr. Nicolaou. I mean, it's an important one. As we started to see the U.S. President Donald Trump announcing those tariffs for over 100 countries, us included, of course, a lot of certainly the viewers and pundits here in South Africa have said, well, this is time for us and a signal that we must look for other markets. Talk to me about what you got out of that meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, and if we're moving in the right direction here while also having conversations with Washington.
Firstly, good evening to all the viewers, and thanks very much for having us. Let me preface my response with a comment, and that is to say that the posture of organized business in South Africa is very much to look at these relationships on what represents the best economic interest for the country. And that means we will trade with the East, with the West, and with the South. We're agnostic to some of the political developments because we believe that in the main, our foreign policy should be at very least substantially anchored in what is in the best economic interest, what grows their economy, what creates jobs. So having prefaced that, let me answer directly to your question. South Africa is no different, I think, to most other countries at the moment who are trying to understand the global reconfiguring of the tariff and trade environment and landscape. And many countries, including ourselves, as part of that strategy, are looking to diversify their economic partnerships. This means strengthening bilaterals and multilaterals with existing partners and also looking for new partners. Now, we haven't done much trade with Ukraine as South Africa historically. Ukraine are leaders in certain fields. We rely on them in part for fertilizer, for maize and grain. There's things that South Africa can offer Ukraine. There's going to be a small matter of a post-war reconstruction and development. Our construction companies have experience in those areas. There's also opportunity in agriculture, agro-processing. Ukraine wants to sell us poultry. We want to sell them fruit and citrus. And then, of course, manufactured products as well. So the basis of this visit is to establish a new partnership here that is not only specific to Ukraine and South Africa, but also looks more broadly at the regions and the continent. We don't have significant trade with Eastern Europe, that is South Africa, and Ukraine, its proximity to the Black Sea, could be an interesting prospect in terms of developing our trade, investment, commerce, and business with the Eastern European countries.
Yeah, but politically, where does this put us? So Professor Otto, perhaps then you can help us. And I'm talking geopolitically, because again, I talk about the balancing act that we seem to be doing. Dr. Nicolaou talking about the opportunities that can possibly grow from us doing business with the eastern part of Europe. But are we putting AGOA at risk, or has that ship sailed?
I think perhaps to a large degree that ship has sailed, just because, South Africa-US relations have been strained for quite some time. And to speak quite frankly, I don't think that there is necessarily sense reigning in Washington. I don't know that that engagements with the United States have rendered the kind of outcomes that we have wanted, whether we've been making progress in that regard. And I think that our engagements in this particular issue, relevant to the conflict in Ukraine, speaks also to South Africa's ambitions at kind of regaining some of the stature that it used to hold on the international stage, and by positioning itself as a potential mediator in this conflict, as one of the kind of uniquely positioned countries that could potentially bring Putin to the table in a more meaningful way than other engagements to date have done. I think that that's more the thinking in this regard, and I think that there's probably a degree of acceptance that the situation with the United States is not one where logic will necessarily prevail.
There's a question for the viewer. If South Africa, obviously in conversation with the Ukrainian leadership, starts to engage on the war between Ukraine and Russia, just how important is South Africa's voice in all of this, when we have seen intervention by US President Donald Trump not necessarily bringing about a lot of results? But could South Africa shift the needle? And what does this do for us as a nation? We're taking calls 01059461010, taking your WhatsApps as well on 072-110-5584. We'll continue the discussion after this short break. Welcome back. We continue our discussion as, of course, we see this week the president of Ukraine having a visit to South Africa. But what is it that South Africa really can do in the Russia-Ukraine conflict? And also, what does this mean for our own trade relations and our geopolitical position in such an important year as we chair the G20? We're taking your calls on 010-594-6010 or your WhatsApps on 072-110-5584. Prof. Otto, I think this is an important one. It comes to you. And I don't know if this is a confidence issue, and certainly what it does for the South African and how they view themselves on the bigger global landscape. But you've seen US President Donald Trump try and engage Russia and the Ukraine, and yet over the Easter weekend, the missiles continued between the two countries. So that not necessarily giving us any results. Can South Africa make a difference, Prof?
Well, I think I probably echo Dr. Kingsley Makubela's position there in terms of the ability that South Africa has to influence there. But I think that there is a bit of capacity, I suppose, to be able to bring these parties round the table in a way that the United States has not been able to, and indeed that these renewed efforts, I think, by France and the UK have also not been able to. Ultimately, the European partners are going to be viewed as being necessarily biased towards Ukraine and against Russia. Likewise, President Trump has been seen to a certain degree to have been played by Putin, who's looking to gain some strategic advantage ahead of the kind of laying out of any conditions. South Africa, from that point of view, could be a party that is perhaps slightly more neutral, although some would argue that that it is necessarily a country that could be considered pro-Russian by some. With Zelensky coming here, I think that opens the way for a little bit more kind of confidence on both sides. So I think South Africa can offer that. However, to what degree can it push these countries to be able to make concessions? What kind of power does it have relative to these countries to be able to push something across the line? I think that's the question that remains.
Yeah, I wonder, Dr. Nicolaou, in a conversation with the Deputy Prime Minister of the Ukraine, when you've got, South Africa that has just, had a phone call between the two leaders of Ukraine and South Africa, if in that conversation, when we start talking about doing trade, if we dance around the issue, I mean, let us be a fly in the wall as to what comes up when we start talking about opportunities that are available to us. But when that relationship comes up, what does business say?
So, as I indicated earlier, there are many different layers to this visit. And I think just the notion or the fact that we've been able to get a wartime president to come and visit South Africa at the time where we are chairing the G20. That in itself is some achievement in terms of how we position South Africa as an AU powerhouse in globally speaking, right? So I think that in itself already is some achievement. Of course, do we have the power to be the final trigger or push for a ceasefire? Probably not, and I'm not sure that is what we are necessarily aiming to achieve here. I think what we are trying to do is create through our G20 officers, our AU officers, our BRICS Plus officers, I think we are trying to create an environment that appears to be more neutral to enable ceasefire discussions to take place. Of course, there are differences between the two sides. There's differences around the annexation of land and all the rest of it. But I think we have to measure our success on this visit threefold. Number one is, does this help us diversify our trade at the time we've been seeing these seismic global trade shifts? And I think the EU is a very important partner for South Africa, and the EU is seeing this visit very favorably. And I don't have to remind anyone that the EU is our second biggest trading partner. It's Africa 1, EU 2, and then China. So it's important from that perspective. The second thing we should measure results against is there some form of economic partnership, country to country, but also regionally, that gets laid as a foundation? And then the third thing is, do we contribute in some small way to pushing along the ceasefire discussions? I think for me, those are the three measures. And I think we've got a fairly good chance at all three of these, actually. If not three, then certainly the first two.
All right. Well, let's take some calls. 0105946010. Lots going on where South Africa is concerned, especially as it interacts with the global landscape. You've got Finance Minister and Central Bank Governor or Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago in Washington, D.C., talking to their counterparts with the G20. At the same time, here in South Africa this week, we host the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Are we doing the right things? And certainly, is this going to put us in the right sort of position to continue growing our economy? Taking calls. Mike is from Johannesburg. Mike, good evening. Thanks for calling.
Good evening, ma'am, and how are you?
I'm well, sir. Talk to me.
I'm very much impressed about the visit of Volodymyr Zelenskyy from Ukraine. Why I'm saying this, allow me to say that Hello? Can you
I'm
hear me?
listening to you, Mike. You go ahead, please.
Yes, yes. Let's say I'm very much happy with the visit of Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And therefore, why I'm so happy about him. Remember, South Africa in the world, his policies are the best, South Africa. But domestically, we got flaws that are around, which we need to fix about. So when we're going to internationally, I really want to tell you that all those flaws that have been made with Donald Trump, it will help South Africa to gain more power, which it will be enhanced with Russia together to get peace in Ukraine, making sure that the country or the world is in peace, more especially to avoid the USA to come in our country. So the respect that we're going to be gaining when we can manage to keep peace and stability in Ukraine, I can assure you, my leader, South Africa, I applaud our president, which is growing and getting better and better like a wine almost every day. His president is so positive, my leader.
Yeah, that is a confident perspective there. Thank you so much, Mike, from Johannesburg. Mr. Mate, perhaps you would agree with that. And if you want to respond to what we've heard from Mike, if the moves that we're making grow confidence, certainly in what South Africa is able to do, and that being good for business. But I want to get also, your call to action to the president. What beats he needs to hit as he meets with Zelenskyy?
Well, as Stavros indicated earlier, Dr. Nikolai, we are in a world in which there are seismic shifts from a trade perspective. But this also takes place during a year in which South Africa has been given a global stage to exercise leadership through the presidency of the G20. And so I think the president is really taking advantage of those opportunities and really contributing in a small way to bringing these two leaders, or at least attempting to bring these two leaders together and try to end the war, which I have no doubt everybody wants to end. It is in nobody's interest for war to continue for an extended period in that region. So I think it has to be seen in that context. Of course, this bodes well for economic opportunities for South Africa, for strengthening and increasing trade with Ukraine and the rest of that region, which is currently quite minimal. That taking place during a period in which, as we've said repeatedly, there are these seismic shifts, which will undoubtedly affect an economy like South Africa, which is a small but open economy. So when there are the kinds of impacts we're seeing, that is bound to affect our ability to grow our economy. And so finding and expanding our markets through these kinds of relations is absolutely important. And so I think all of this needs to be seen in the context of a leader who is given this global stage to exercise leadership, but also acting in the best interest of his own country, a country that is facing a weak economy, a country that is also facing a likelihood of very high tariffs, as we know, that have been suspended, which will impact our economy in a very significant way.
Yeah. Prof. Otto, in a situation perhaps that we let play out in our imaginations, if you will, you're sitting with the president and you say, these are the beats you need to hit with Zelenskyy, what would you say? And I need just the top three.
I think that, it's about communicating our position around non-alignment in a more kind of coherent way, because I think oftentimes the way that we're perceived internationally, there's a degree of confusion around this positioning. So I think that's the first thing. South Africa has been criticized really on its response to this conflict in a kind of not reflecting even-handedness in its engagements in the United Nations. So I think for me that's really the key thing, is kind of reinforcing these pillars of our foreign policy: respect for international law, kind of these values that we uphold of the liberal international order. And that's really about communicating our foreign policy, especially around non-alignment in a clearer fashion.
Yeah, I'm going to actually ask the three of you to give me those similar beats of what we do, not just with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy as he visits South Africa, but also what we do in Washington, D.C., because we're doing and juggling so much as a country this week. The three beats that we need to hit also in Washington on the other side of this. We take a short break. We are back in a moment. Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. Quite the busy week for South Africa where our international relations is concerned. Finance Minister and Central Bank or Reserve Bank Governor Lesotho Kganyago in Washington, D.C., meeting with their counterparts of the G20. Meanwhile, this week, we host the leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. What are the outcomes that we need to really need to hit at the end of this week for both of these discussions? And we continue our conversation. Dr. Nicolaou, I'm going to ask you for the three beats that we need to hit both sides, but perhaps we can start in Washington.
So I'm going to anchor my three beats on, again, what I said at the outset, that as South African business, we have a posture that we need to trade and invest with partners who offer us or are in our best economic interest and offer us the best deal, so to speak. And for that reason, the United States, which is our fourth largest trading partner and our third largest investor in South Africa, is exceedingly important. So these are my three beats. Number one, we've got to accept that AGOA in its present form is gone post-September. The minute you get tariffs, it's gone anyway for those products. So beat one, negotiate a new trade deal, which appears to be more even keeled. The Americans are concerned that we run a large trade surplus with them. So we're going to have to accept a new trade deal, and we should try and get that done within the 90 days. The second thing is we do need to reset the political tensions. They are not conducive to an enabling environment. I think that we've historically enjoyed great relationships, and I think we've got to try and restore those. And then the third thing is we should use the crisis as an opportunity, meaning that we should use it to further diversify economic partnerships. Let's take this as almost a lesson where we've become too heavily reliant on donor funding, on AGOA, and a little leg up here and a little leg up there. Let's use this as an opportunity to recalibrate our own economy, make it more competitive, and use it as an opportunity to actually grow the economy rather than depend on handouts, antiretroviral drug handouts and donations. Let's do this all ourselves and grow from the experience.
Yeah. Prof. Otto, I'll let you give us your last bite as well, just as we close off, for beats that you think we need to hit in Washington, D.C. I know we did touch on the Ukraine, but I think that would be really important. What we need to get out of that visit in the Ukraine. Then there's the question of, from a representative point of view, have we sent the right people? Now, I'm not just talking about the finance minister and certainly the Reserve Bank governor, but I'm also talking about our special envoy. Have we sent the right people to represent us? Are you confident in that?
I think that the president is taking a kind of measured approach in recalibrating the foreign policy posture, kind of trying to open those channels of strategic communication and transparency, because really we need to institutionalize regular high-level dialogue, kind of bringing back that track one diplomacy, ensuring that we're having that engagement directly between foreign ministers, ministers of defense, trade and industry, and so on. We need clear and proactive messaging around our sensitive kind of foreign policy choices, as I've mentioned, around non-alignment and clarifying our security cooperation with certain countries. I think as I think I mentioned to you the last time we spoke, it's around clarifying really what it is that we're trying to achieve with our foreign policy, but being more transparent around that, and underscoring our commitment to international norms and kind of vision for the world. I think we can do that through our G20 platform as well. But at the moment, I think the important thing is really those kind of high-level engagements with Washington to just really kind of get things back on a more even keel, so that we have a channel in which we want to be heard in Washington, in which there is an appetite to bring things kind of back on track and for a more positive relationship.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a lot of balls in the air. We really, really do. But let's take WhatsApp's 072-110-5584. Our viewers having a lot to say about what South Africa is doing on the global landscape, particularly this week. Let's see some of those WhatsApps that have come in already this evening. PF Mieni says, "Hi, lady. South Africa can make a difference. It's time President Zelenskyy understands that he's a pawn in the NATO game against Russia. President Ramaphosa must tell Zelenskyy facts and not stroke his ego." What would that sound like, Mieni, I wonder? Isaac says it's good to discuss peace. It doesn't need any qualifications to call for peace. Well done to the president. An optimistic Isaac there. Thank you for that. Piri and Alex says, as a country, we need to be clear as to whether we are with Ukraine or Russia. Fact is, we are undecided, and that holds us back in terms of policy. One thing is for sure, Russia never left us during dark times. Piri, we appreciate your input. Victor Moodley sending a WhatsApp once again. Thank you so much for being so consistent, Victor. Ramaphosa can't broker peace within his party. How can he do that with major powers in the world? Concerned voice there from Victor. And Sam says, for me, I'm not comfortable, Naledi. A lot has happened already. South Africa is too small to intervene in this commotion. I think Zelenskyy is looking for someone ill-informed to turn around what Donald Trump is dealing with out there. Let's back off. Sam, appreciate your input as well. I want to take one last comment, and that'll be from Mr. Mate. The ideal sort of reflection that business wants to be having at the end of this week.
Thanks, Naledi. So I think that my fellow panelists have really covered the ground, but I do want to just restate that obviously representing, as we do, business, it is absolutely important that, the situation in that region normalizes, because it is very difficult to do business in an environment which there is instability. But we're not just concerned about stability for the sake of being able to trade and expand trade. We're not unconcerned about what the war is doing to human life in the Ukraine, how it is disrupting education, how it is affecting children, how people are killed and so on. And so from that point of view, it is also important that everything is done to really bring that war to an end. And so we would hope that the president brings his charm. He has experience in, intervening and negotiating deals between warring parties. And we would hope that at least he contributes to that, because it is good for business, but it is good for humanity. I do want to say, though, that in the context of Washington, we should not raise our expectations too high. So the presence of the Minister of Finance and the governor is really just a routine visit to Washington as part of the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. And so we shouldn't start to have expectations that are unrealistic. Of course, it is important to continue restating the importance of multilateralism, which is unfortunately at the moment under attack, because multilateralism is what will save all of us in the end. And if we allow the breaking down of multilateralism and all the institutions that support it, I think we will be worse off as a human society.
Yeah. Guys, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for your time. One thing is for sure is that it could not be more of an interesting time for South Africa as we see the country start to move its chess pieces on the global landscape. Thank you so much to Kulegane Mate, who is, of course, CEO of Business Unity South Africa, Dr. Stavros Nicolaou of the BRICS Business Council, Professor Lisa Otto, Associate Professor and Deputy Director of SACHI, Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. That's at the University of Johannesburg. We take a short break. Newsfeed PM, the late edition, continues after this.